we didn't achieve a lot in our session, and my other player was like, "I just don't have any connections to the world. I am I felt completely bad about this session, and it just felt like you're wanting to tell a story, and our input doesn't matter, and wherever you want us to go is where we'll go, and that's set in stone, and that's not fun."
Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. This is Justin, your host today, and actually your coach today. Today is a very special episode of the podcast where I sit down with a good friend, Alejandro, and walk him through our new Dungeon Master coaching services. If you're interested in having an experience just like this one, stay tuned to the end of the episode and I'll tell you how you can take part in this. But without further ado, let's get to today's episode. As I mentioned in the intro today is a special coaching episode where I sit down with a dungeon master and we're going to talk shop. So, who do I have here with me today? What's your name?
Uh, I'm Alejandro. You can call me Al. That's what I go by usually. I'm from Colombia, and I've came here to the States last year to marry the most precious person in my life.
Wow, that's awesome. I actually was going to ask where you're from, but that's really cool that you came here and married your wife. Um,
Oh,
so, go ahead.
yeah, actually, a lot of our first introductions, we were met up in the internet, and we started playing a lot of D&D, fifth
Wow.
edition. I was still very new to it, and so was she. I was like player um, in a small campaign that, as always, first campaigns tend to fall apart because of scheduling issues and people not wanting to commit too much. But quite frankly, the second I started playing, I just like fell in love with the game. So it was kind of like a late bloomer, but I've been really passionate about this
That's awesome.
for a while now.
Wow. I love that story. It's amazing that D&D is, kind of what brought you and your wife together.
Hmm.
So, how did you or when did you kind of make the transition to being a dungeon master?
Uh, I wanted to be a dungeon master the second I finished playing my first session. I was like, that was so cool. I felt like it wasn't perfect, and a lot of the times we want to be perfect as dungeon masters. We don't have to. It's useful to remind it wasn't perfect. I remember that combat felt a bit of a slog, but the rest of it, I just was like, wow, I want to do this again and again. And I feel like, because I've always had a lot of like creative energy, but I never had a lot of creative talent for drawing or music or painting, anything that requires like any motor skills wasn't there for me. And then I met that, and I'm like, I can make really cool and creative stories without the pressure of I have to publish this or I have to come up with everything by myself. So as soon as I learned about um, this medium, I just started researching. I made my first homebrew world. It was a mess, as usual for anyone that's starting. Uh, and actually, the first adventure that I ran was The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, which is an adventure for like second edition of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Mhm.
But we weren't playing that edition. We were playing fifth edition. So I just started reading through all of it. I found a PDF online, and I just um, read through the story. And I remember that it had a key and listing of all of each of the rooms. So I just like, but it didn't have a map, so I made my own map based on the description of the rooms. And I didn't understand completely how they wanted me to lay it out, so I just lay it out how I thought made the most sense, and I made a lot of changes here and there. Um, and I did like I essentially revamped the whole story, and like 2 days before I learned before I had to run the campaign, I learned that there was a fifth edition conversion called Ghosts of Saltmarsh. And I'm like, okay. And then I read through it, and I was like, actually, I like mine better.
That's awesome.
So um, this is pretty interesting intro to D&D. That first adventure that I ran was a success. It wasn't
Hmm.
perfect, but it was successful, and all of my players had fun. So I was like, okay, I feel like I can write on my own. And then I started writing on my own. And then my second adventure was absolute disaster. My players had no idea of where they wanted to go, and they just fell through the rabbit hole, and eventually I TPK'd them accidentally, of course. They were
Of
second
course, right?
level. They were second level. I was not trying to. I just started rolling nat 20s, and they weren't having fun. So I said, well, I may just end it and learn from it.
Hmm.
But it was an interesting experience to see, okay, the difference between running a module, even if it's more like revamping a module from the ground up, um, and just starting to create my own adventures. And both of them were fun. Even though running the module was more successful, I felt like writing my own adventure had more power, and I
Mm,
felt like there were a lot of things that I did well. I just miss some key details, especially how to like connect the dots or make the dots visible enough for my players to connect them, which they never did.
hmm.
The biggest problem,
Yeah.
you see all of the dots, your players don't.
Okay. So, when you say dots, are you meaning specific plot points, or are you meaning just kind of like, uh, for example, you have kind of a murder plot line, and the party is starting to pick up the clues and connect the dots that way? Which way do you mean?
Uh, well, I think when I say dots, it can mean a lot of things. But specifically, you could say, okay, I made an adventure hook, and my players didn't latch onto it.
Mm,
I put a conclusion, and my players came up with connections that were totally there, like conclusions that I don't know how they got there, but they got there. I've learned that now I put my things less set in stone, and if they just come
mm,
to a conclusion, that's not what I was expecting them to, which is often. I just say, okay, uh, I'll just take what they concluded and just add a little bit of a twist to it. So I've improved a lot in that regard. Instead of, oh no, this is my adventure, this is how it has to go, and if they don't follow these plot points, then screw them. That's not a healthy way to look at the game.
absolutely. Honestly, I like that's something I think we often learn time and time again is that, when we get too set in our ways, then a session doesn't go well, and then we realize, oh, it's because I was maybe too heavy-handed with how I wanted to enforce the story rather than let them unfold it. So I totally understand and agree with that. So Al, before we hopped on today, you sent me over sort of a list of topics you wanted to talk
Hmm.
about. They are how to bounce back after a bad session, how to build on and consistently create great sessions, how to build and run a mega dungeon, how to evaluate growth as a DM, and then prep got thrown out. Now what? Do you want to talk about any specific one in particular first, or do you actually want to talk about something else that's kind of been on your mind?
Actually, I think that I'll leave it up to the host to tell me
Sure,
which do you think is like the best way to intro to this
sure.
coaching session. I think that
Yeah. Well, based on our conversation for the listener, we kind of hopped on the phone yesterday, and Al gave me kind of some background on his campaign, some things that have been going on. Based on that, I think bouncing back after a bad session might be the best one to start with, just because that experience kind of seems somewhat more fresh in your mind. Could you walk us through sort of your most recent experience with having a quote unquote bad session and what all happened with that?
okay. Well, I think I was feeling a little burnt out, um, but I wanted to play D&D regardless. So I just kind of like rushed through my own prep. I didn't prep enough. Um, there's a very interesting quote from Mike Shea from Sly Flourish, and he said that we should prep enough so that we don't get anxious about running the game.
Hmm.
And I find that to be very true. Whenever I run a game, the more prep that I have, the more I'm willing to go off script and have a yes and mentality. And I did not prep enough for that session. I just had like the skeleton, the bare bones of what I normally prep. So I came to the table and I hard railroad my players, um, and one of them is a little more along for the ride, so he didn't care too much about that. Um, we didn't achieve a lot in our session, and my other player was like, I just don't have any connections to the world. I am I felt completely bad about this session, and it just felt like you're wanting to tell a story and our input doesn't matter, and wherever you want us to go is where we'll go, and that's set in stone, and that's not fun. And that was tough on me because she was right. She was
Hmm.
completely right. And I felt terrible because this means much. This means a lot to me. And I disappointed my players. I disappointed myself. So I was completely out of it. Probably months without playing because I didn't want to pick up the screen again. Then my wife told me that I I was just acting like a shell of myself,
Hmm.
and I took that. It almost kind of like made me grow up a little bit. I started waking up earlier. I try to keep a track of all of my things to do, and suddenly I find myself with more time, less time staring at my phone and doom scrolling, and that just gave me the time and to start prepping more and more for my campaigns. And I also had the very strong advantage that I knew exactly where my next session was starting.
Hmm.
And I feel like without that, I don't know if I'd still be DMing right now. But because I had a place to pivot from, and then instead of being like, okay, my players are gonna do this, then this, then this, and call it a session, I said, okay, I'm just gonna create a place. I know my players will explore this place because it was related to set players who told me they weren't very involved in the world. So I knew I just had to prep that place. And funnily enough, once again, my players came up with an idea that I did not expect, and I just ran off with it.
Hmm.
And from there, I just started expanding the world and just putting like a lot of places for my players to latch onto, and I just follow whatever they think that's their best course, and I just lay out the road in front of them instead of laying out the exact path they have to head towards. Mm, again, the biggest point is, what if I didn't have that pivot place? How do you
Hmm.
start? How do you make a pivot place after a bad session? Because I
Yeah.
can't always rely that I'll have that one lifeline to bail me out.
Yeah. So first thing I want to say, and this is to you, Al, but also to myself and to every dungeon master out there, is that bad sessions are going to happen. And frankly, one big goal that we have here on the podcast is to help prevent dungeon masters stop wanting to be dungeon masters because they're not having fun anymore, right? So I'm really happy that we're talking about this. Before I answer the question of what to do about a pivot place, I kind of want to dig in to maybe some of the information before the bad session really happened, because I've had experiences somewhat similar to this where players mentioned, "Hey, I feel like my character isn't really a character in this world, right? Like they're just a face and a name. They don't really have connections. I don't really get to role play too much, stuff like that." And I completely understand where you're coming from, because when they say that, even though in my case they weren't necessarily saying like, "Hey, this was not great," but to me it still felt like, oh crap, I failed because they're not having fun, right? So I completely understand. With your character, tell me a little bit about kind of how much backstory they've had, and what was their process for building backstory as it relates to the world.
Well, that's a good question. And for the campaign, I actually created my own custom background.
Hmm.
It is called the Accursed uh,
Hmm.
background, and basically, it is of those individuals in society that uh, any like the stereotypical good, hardworking folk will look the other way. So we talk about characters who may have made a deal with a hag and now have to pay a price. Characters that were tortured by a wizard and are now forever changed,
Hmm.
and stuff like that. Like very defining events that have now made you an outcast from society. Uh, Instead of something, oh, I grew up on the streets. No, it has to be like normally some foreign influence that affected you, and now you're on the edge, on the fringe of civilization. Um, so basically, it's about the underbelly of the story is a lot about the underbelly of a high fantasy society.
Hmm.
Um, and as a contrast to that, I have this where it's
You're fine.
this huge association known as Magicry, and Magicry essentially is the magic police, if you want to
Hmm.
think about it like that. So every time there's a magical event, they go out and like try to poke at it. Um, so I run a small campaign. It's just two players.
Hmm.
Um, it's been an interesting experience. On one hand, I feel restricted on how many monsters I can have and what they
Hmm.
can do. On the other, it's far easier to schedule because I don't have to worry about, oh, one of my players missed because it's only two players. If one of them misses, we don't
Hmm.
have a session. If they're both there, we have a session. End of the story. So
Yeah.
it's refreshing in that regard. One of my players had a lab, and they because the region is a coastal region.
Hmm.
My player is obsessed with sea creatures, and the character studies them and just takes notes, experiments, and tries to find out as much as they can about them. Um, And well, she had a lab, and she was experimenting with magic, and there was uh, an explosion in the lab, and well, Magicry got involved, and now she had to kind of run away. She became a curse because through the explosion, her body was forever altered. Uh, and uh, she also had an assistant who is kind of a main plot right now
Hmm.
in the story. You've read through my notes. I don't know if you know who
Yeah,
I'm talking about.
yeah, I do. You
Okay.
don't necessarily need to name the name. And if you're listening, listener, just know that these are spoilers, right? So if you are going to talk about this campaign with Al or any of his players, be kind and gentle how you talk about it, and probably don't unless you get permission, right? Wouldn't it be nice to gamify your dungeon master abilities? In D&D, characters can reach level 20, so why can't dungeon masters? We're happy to tell you that now you can. We created the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for you. It's a simple tool to gamify your progression to higher and higher levels of dungeon mastery. It includes Dungeon Master levels 1 to 20 with associated XP requirements, as well as a long list of Dungeon Master activities that will give you XP to get you to level 20. Each activity has a challenge rating and an XP amount. In order to level up, all you need to do is find out how much XP you currently have, find out how much you need, and then pick activities to get you there. You can get the Dungeon Master Level Up Guide for free by going to sessionzerostudios.com/newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter once you get there, and we'll email you the Level Up Guide in the first email. Finally, leveling up as a DM can be as fun as leveling up a character. Wouldn't it be nice to have someone in your corner as a dungeon master? Maybe having someone who can help you find solutions to your DMing problems and help you improve every aspect of your game. Maybe someone who has a pretty good Al Pacino impersonation from his part in Any Given Sunday. Well, here at How to Be a Better DM, we are doing an experiment. We are offering 5 free coaching sessions to separate listeners of the show. During these coaching sessions, we'll work with you through your strengths and weaknesses as a DM to help you generate a game plan to make both better. You can either send in a recording of one of your games, or we'll attend it live if able. If all else fails, we can still chat about what you struggle with and talk with you through any prep you've done for your upcoming aims to help you be better. If you're interested for one of these 5 free coaching sessions, go to sessionzerostudios.com/coaching and sign up. So I love your description because I think to stop players feeling like they have no connections to the world, right? One thing that you need to do, and it's kind of part A, part B. Part A, you need to make sure that everyone has a backstory that is connected to the world in some way, connected to the main plot in some way, so that way, you can kind of tie into it a little bit. And it sounds like you've done exactly that. Part B, I would say, is every session, every character, every player wants at least an opportunity to feel special, right? Even if it's somewhat
Yes.
small. So tell
Totally.
me, I'm guessing you do that just based on the sessions after that one, specifically where the male, I forget his name,
Th-
Thor
Thanathus?
Thanathus, yes,
Yes.
where he has this moment while Kodressa is inspecting a starfish.
Yes.
Yes, that was a perfect example. Did you do much of that sort of things before the hard session?
So here's what I'm gonna say.
Mm,
I feel like it wasn't like a sudden drop.
mm,
It was more like um it was a very gentle slope.
gotcha.
And my some of my players were like, okay, that's pretty cool, and but it was a good session, but I could still sense that they weren't completely happy, but
Mm,
they were happy enough. And
yeah.
as a dungeon master, I think that I could have done a better job at like taking in their suggestions
Mm,
rather than what I did, which was I heard their suggestions and I didn't pay enough attention to them and I didn't include them enough in the game. And it's something that I think I got significantly better.
mm,
Um, One of the events that happened, and that's related to the same event you're talking about, where my player actually got to intercept the message.
mhm,
Uh, he read the message. They read it out loud, and then he was like, he didn't like the wording, the
mhm.
original wording of it, because I had put like we are ready to test our powerful and sinister weapon. And he was like, would they really say it's a sinister weapon? Did they really think they're the baddies? I'm like, and that's the advantage of like playing online and having digital
Mhm,
handouts is that I can edit them out in a matter of seconds. And I'm like, you know what, you're right. And I immediately just changed it to ultimate. Like, oh yeah, that sounds way better. And we all agreed that that was better. Um, and I feel like taking in those suggestions from your players is crucial.
mhm.
And I hadn't. I think that's a lesson that I learned the hard way. Um, but yeah, go ahead if
Yeah.
that's any
No,
input.
no. I think that's amazing. You definitely need to cultivate a table where you can give that kind of back and forth. And it really depends on sort of your situation, right? Like if you're um, trying to do, I don't know, like a professional recording or something, then maybe that might not be as welcome. But you really just need to know your table and know your players and be comfortable, like Al said, uh, getting that kind of feedback. I did want to touch on something else before we get to what to do if you don't have a pivot point. Um, at the beginning, you said you were feeling burnt out, you were rushing through prep, which made you feel like you didn't have enough prep. That feeling of burnt out, tell me a little bit about that. What do you think sort of kind of led to that?
Hmm, that's that's a good question. Uh, Probably I'm just gonna say that um, I I came into the US in like February January of last year.
Hmm,
Uh, and I was still on my tourist visa,
hmm,
which means I couldn't get a job.
dang.
So I was like just trying to do whatever I could around the house, but I had a lot of guilty free time
Yeah.
because I had free time at the expense that I felt like I didn't deserve this amount of free time that I had.
Yeah.
Um, and I just like put the pencil down and just started writing amounts of lore and world building, and it made the sessions really good because I had more time and I used Tailspire then for my maps,
Hmm.
which means I had really cool looking maps, really detailed, and because they were so detailed, um, I actually uh, it gave my players the idea that they could really interact with them. So, for example, I built like a lot of structures like palisades and like there was a road and my players needed to ambush a caravan,
Hmm.
and first they met up with like the quest giver, um and when they met up with the quest giver, it was at an inn, and he told them, okay, he actually ambushed them first, uh and it was like to show how like powerful, if they were capable enough, because he didn't want a sloppy job done. He was looking
Yeah.
for someone that was really going to do it. um and well, my players of course, because they're the protagonists, they're cool. They wiped the floor with his goons, and he was like, "Well, okay, you are like the perfect candidate for the job." Uh, and he informed them that there was a checkpoint held by a druidic subfaction of Magicry, that they were gonna reunite with them. The caravan was gonna reunite with them, and that would just make the whole process completely uh, difficult. So they went there first. They attacked the place, and then they set up an ambush just a few feet further into the road before the disaster of the palisade actually happened, or where it
Hmm.
happened. Uh, and it was really cool because one of my players went underneath part of the structure and just used his weapon and destroy the building around. So I just described how the whole building collapsed and it killed
Wow.
several of them. Um, it was it was pretty fun. That was pretty fun. Um, where was I going with this?
Totally fine.
Sorry.
I was asking what was leading up to that feeling
Okay.
of being burnt out.
Right. I had these really fun sessions because I had a lot of time to really focus on my prep.
Yeah.
Uh, I did get married during the summer, like the summer of last year.
Hmm.
We took a small break from that because we were like, just enjoying
Hmm.
being married. Then we kept playing. Life got in the way sometimes, not mine because I had nothing to do. I had just
Right.
to help around. Um, but then and we still played a lot, and I had a lot of time to prep, and I could put a lot of effort into prepping. Uh, and then I actually got my work permit,
Mm.
so I started working, and now all this time that I had was gone,
Yeah.
vanished. But I was still trying to put the same amount of effort that I had before. Uh, and it was also heading towards, um, it was like I started to move my players away from their like home base where they were located in order to pursue this greater quest, because before they were just small adventures made to like introduce the players into the world, get them to level up faster, because I wanted to actually throw challenges at them, but I
Hmm.
can't if they're like at level 5. If there's just two of them, if I had more, I could throw stronger things, but I just had two of them, so I essentially knew that I had to make them stronger before I could challenge them. And once they were strong, I started slowly leading them away from their main base, uh, and now suddenly I have to create this entire region with like, let's say, a quarter of the amount of time to prep, while still trying to develop this overarching storyline, which I had been building up slightly until this point, because now it's where we get into. I had to, one, create the region, two, actually get into this large storytelling, that an arc, as if you will, that
Hmm.
spans over multiple sessions instead of one or two sessions, as we were doing before. And also, I had to deal with uh, under learning my new job, because
Yep.
I'm not. It's my job is not super um, complicated, but it is quite stressful. There's a learning curve,
Hmm.
but it's very tiresome. I leave work and I feel like I'm about to collapse. Uh, so yeah, that was really hard for me to do
Yeah.
because I wanted to do like all of those things. I didn't have a good system of how to create uh, an environment, an arc, sessions, and encounters all at the same time.
Hmm.
Then I actually heard your podcast on the case method. That actually
Yeah.
helped me a lot on building um, the the comeback session.
Yeah.
Uh, from there, I also actually well, that's essentially what led to the downfall.
Yeah.
The turning point is that podcast, and I also bought uh, a book. Uh, 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 can I make a plugin for a book that I don't own?
Sure. I mean, we're not going to get sponsored from it or whatever, but I'll put the link in the show notes in case anyone is interested.
Yeah, okay. Uh, I got this book, The Game Master's Handbook of Proactive Role Playing.
Ooh.
And as started reading this, I really got back into a groove. Uh, and it's those two things, case method and this book, really helped me get back up on my feet and start DMing. And since then, we've had 3 sessions, 4 sessions after next weekend. And these 3 sessions, they haven't been perfect, but they felt good,
Hmm.
and I'd say they felt great. And one of my players described one of them as a god session, and I was like, "Whoa, that's a big compliment."
That's awesome.
Uh,
Quite the turnaround from the previous one.
my other player, who was the one that was had the most complaints, said, "Well, that's between these 3 sessions, I'd give them a 9 out of 10."
Wow.
So I'm like, I'm doing great.
Yeah. That is awesome. See, being able to turn around that, I think that is where so much growth as a dungeon master happens, and I'm really excited that that was able to happen and that you were able to turn that around. A couple notes on kind of burnout. So first of all, congratulations on getting your work visa. Not having a job but still feeling like you want to contribute, like that can be pretty debilitating. So I totally get that. And as dungeon masters, we do have to understand that it is a game and that other priorities exist in the world. Sometimes people cancel on our sessions and we get mad, but at the end of the day, you need a job, you need to work, eat, survive, right? And when changes like that happen, I would recommend explaining that to the group and saying we might have to do some creative things moving forward. For example, my wife and I had a baby, and we're slowly starting to realize that we either need to, in our personal campaign, we need to have smaller sessions. We need to get a babysitter every week. And because of that, we'd probably need to do every other week sessions. Basically, new circumstances in your life might necessitate you having to change how you play your game, right? And it sounds like that's exactly what you did. You took a break, for better or worse, right? It sounds like it was for the better. And you sort of reassessed how you were going at your processes for playing the game, right? So that's exactly what dungeon masters need to do when new things happen, right? If you decide to get a new job, a second job, if you're moving, if you are going to school, all these things, if you have medical issues, if someone dies, right? Like we all need to be understanding of our players having these situations, but we need to ask them for that same understanding in return. um, Now, you asked, how do you pivot if you don't have a pivot, right?
Hmm.
So in your case, you described that finding new material in the form of this podcast episode that we did on the case method and that book, the Game Master's Handbook of Proactive Role Playing. That sounds like an amazing book. I'm going to look that up and get it. Um, But it also sounded like, based on the last session, you sort of had, for a rock climbing analogy, you could see the next handholds that you needed to grab onto for your next session.
Hmm.
Was that right?
Yes, that is completely accurate. I didn't know where the session was gonna end, and I think that was one of the biggest mistakes. Before, in the bad session, I saw this is where we are, and this is where we're gonna end.
Mm,
And whenever I do this, my sessions aren't nearly as fun. Instead, here I was like, okay, here's where we're gonna start. I'm just gonna build this. Let's see where it takes us.
yeah.
And because I did that, the session became so much more fun, and I kind of like learn from it. And that's at least my approach. I know where the session starts. Here's how it might go. It doesn't have to be how it goes.
Yeah. I think as a dungeon master, we have this really hard dichotomy to walk, because we're writers, but we're also game facilitators, you could say. So obviously, we have stories that we want to tell, right? But a writer has the luxury that everything that happens, they get to decide. We don't necessarily have that luxury. We have to let things open to our players. So instead of being like Siri or Apple Maps, Google Maps telling us the route, we sort of need to make our games a little bit more like the maps you'd get at like theme parks, where it describes the rides that are at each location. And if your players go there, they find that ride essentially. And if it just so happens that sometimes a ride moves locations to be wherever you need it to be, that's also a possibility. But I definitely see what you mean in having that difficulty. But for dungeon masters who are looking for basically the next pivot point, what I would suggest is go over your last session, like just really analyze it in your mind. And I would bet money that the more you think about your last session, and maybe even the last previous sessions, the more you'll start to realize, oh yeah, there was that kind of thread that we left untaken care of, or loose, right? There's that loose thread, right? That person wanted to go do this, or they wanted to talk to someone, or they sent that message, right? And when you think about your last sessions, I think, you know, just naturally those handholds that I was talking about just kind of start to pop up in your mind. And you don't even need to necessarily continue the whole story, but you'll see different ways of, oh, yeah, like this is what we can do at the start of next session. And I think sometimes that's enough, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Then, were you going to say something?
No. Good.
The next thing I think that you did that was absolutely correct is, if you are feeling burnt out, you're rushing through prep, and you're starting to not have so much fun, you should take a break, right? You should uh, pause and kind of re, um, not, what's the word? Gosh, I can't even think of the word now. It's like, take care of yourself for a second, right? Make sure that you're okay. So that way, when you play, it's not draining your life, but adding to it. And I would even add in that playing one shots, also a great method of taking a break, making your mind think about something else that you don't necessarily need to button up as cleanly, right? It's just kind of one adventure, one simple thing. And railroading is a little bit more allowed because, well, you only have 4 hours or whatnot. Doing stuff like that, I think, can really, first of all, calm you down, right? And kind of get you level and centered, and then open up your mind, because when you have fun, it's a lot easier to think of more ways to have fun in D&D rather than just, I need to do this and that, and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, so I agree with that. And I actually like to add in. Uh, Sometimes it's good. Maybe take a break from
Mm-hmm.
the system and the genre. Something that helped me a lot is last year when I had a lot of time to prep. I actually got into Mothership. Have you played Mothership before?
I haven't.
So Mothership is essentially a science fiction horror role
Mhm.
playing game, and it follow as storylines very similar to that of like old horror movies. Think of Alien,
Mm.
um, um, Event Space Horizon, I think it's called. Uh, and that just because I was kind of like I like saw this new system. Um, I actually got my wife to start watching the Alien movies, and right now we already watch all of the mainline Alien movies.
Wow.
Uh, and during this break, I actually saw, I think it was Alien 3. And just by seeing this movie in my head, I was just like, I could use this in a mothership game. And just this thought process of having my gears turning actually made me want to uh, start DMing again. And I didn't actually go back to mothership because um, stuff happened with that game. Not the game, stuff happened with our game in particular.
Mm.
So we haven't played, but just the activity and the idea of how could I actually make this into a role playing game? Actually, make me want to play more again.
Yeah, I love it. See, I think sometimes we get too much in our heads when we have bad sessions, right? Um, as humans, we tend to put emphasis on everything that we're doing, right? And everything that we're doing kind of becomes the most important thing for us. And it's hard for us to imagine sometimes a world where that's not necessarily the case, right? Where it's not the most important thing or as important as it is. But taking a break and kind of moving away and doing other things that are equally as important can really, like you said, open up your mind and let you just have the mental space, the bandwidth to, be really creative and kind of work things out. So I think my main tip for bouncing back after having a bad session is do something else, take a break. And I think the last one is just rediscover why you were having fun with it in the first place and go back to that, right? So in your last session, if things are one way and it's not fun, then go back to how it was fun, right? Maybe make the campaign a little bit less serious or add in some mechanics that you really enjoyed. Have them do another encounter that you really enjoyed. Because if you're not having fun, your players will likely not have fun either. Al, we are coming down to the end of our time together. So to finish up, is there anything else, any other last things that you'd like to say before we sign off?
No, I feel like um, this was great. And I say I really like the last thing you said. The rediscover why you had fun is so important because that's actually one of the complaints that I told to my wife. I was like, I'm just not having fun with D&D. It's not exciting to me right now. And it was like a very emotional part of our relationship, and we slowly started to get back on track. And now now I'm in a better place because we had that conversation and we started to figure out how do I start looking at that. I think we also watch um, the Lords of the Rings movies, extended edition, of course, uh, and just like those things that like make you fall back in love with it are so important, so useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think every dungeon master out there can really relate to having one of those experiences. I had one with my wife where I was like, I feel like I failed as a dungeon master today. And we remember those, but I think what's more important to remember is the trend of fun that you have over all your sessions. So I just want to say thanks so much for joining me today, Al. I truly hope something that we talked about has helped you, and for the listener, I hope it's helped you as well. And like I said at the beginning of today's episode, if you are interested in having a Dungeon Master coaching session with one of us, Here's how you can do that. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/coaching and sign up for your session. If you're up for having us record it, the first session is free. Again, that's sessionzerostudios.com/coaching. Thank you again for listening to today's episode. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. I sincerely hope you appreciated it. But that's enough from us today. Thank you again for listening, and we'll be back next time with another handcrafted episode just for you. Until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.